Hello, everyone. Welcome to SecurIT, where we discuss all things cybersecurity, people, trends, and products. Thank you for joining us today on our continuing journey. Today's guest is going to go into a little bit of the periphery in terms of cybersecurity, yet we're going to talk about the implications on what we do on a day-to-day basis. November of last year, November 2nd to be exact, is when I met our guest in between a 200 to 300 person general session and a plane that she had to catch. And she managed to keep us glued to our seats right to the very end. She's based out of Chicago, international attorney, board member, mentor, and, ladies and gentlemen, 2024 Notable Woman of the Year. I give you Blair Dawson, who specializes in data security. Hello, Blair.
Hello. Thank you so much for those kind words. I appreciate that.
I am so glad you're here. One of the slides that got me was you actually saying that, look, we've got 50 states and we've probably have 50 privacy laws and regulations and governance to comply with. So that was just jaw-dropping. And I quote you often, and we hope our readers, I know our listeners will get much out of this conversation. So let's start as we usually do in these sessions with you. And then we'll end with you. And in the middle, we'll talk a little bit about technology. So, Blair, massive number of awards that our listeners can look at on your LinkedIn, um, including the latest one, as I mentioned, Notable Woman of the Year. You're published, and your career is publicly facing on LinkedIn that people can easily follow.
Yeah.
You've now gravitated more towards the technology field, especially with privacy. Can you share three career moves that were milestones that got you here as part of your origin story, please?
Yeah, I think for me to have these three benchmarks that are notable to me would be being a baby lawyer right out of law school, doing domestic coverage, insurance coverage, defense, and coverage work, and then having this amazing opportunity to work at a smaller boutique firm that focused at Lloyd's in London. So I was introduced to that market very early on in my career. And about mid 2000s, I had a couple of the syndicates there approach me about, we're thinking about doing cyber insurance. Because at that time, it was a supplement that nobody knew anything about. How would it apply? It was something like $5,000 sometimes 10,000.
And which
Uh,
year was this, Blair?
I think it was about 2005,
Oh, wow.
2006.
Okay. So cyber insurance was in its nascency.
Yeah, they were thinking about it at that time. And unfortunately, the group that I was working with at that time, the practice lead actually said, "That's a fad. We don't need to worry about that." Like, okay. So the next piece would be moving into cybersecurity. Many years later, I had an opportunity after working in-house for a time where I was leading the response for cyber incidences that were occurring, and I just really took to it. That's really the pinnacle of my career. I couldn't enjoy what I'm doing any more than I do. I've really dived in. As you noted, I went and tried to get as many of the certifications that I could get for the different areas of law. I just completed my master's of science in cybersecurity in December, and I'm looking at some other opportunities just to expand my knowledge base. I just, like I mentioned, I couldn't be happier about where I'm at and how I can help people.
Awesome. We'll talk a little bit more about cyber insurance, but your passion for what you do shows, and you're able to take two things, technology and, more importantly, legalese, and dumb it down for us, or at least make it, I wouldn't say dumb it down because your audience are reasonably smart people, and
Mhm.
but convey it in just normal language to be able to be interpreted and allow us to go back to implement. And what you did at the Channel Pro event was really good. It was an excellent presentation. I'm sure it is online somewhere, and we'll make a note to put it in our show notes so people can always catch up with that presentation. Um, let's talk a little bit about as we continue with your career. So this this is this is an interesting question. It's usually asked of people, who approached the or are at the pinnacle of their careers. You've doing extremely well, and I continue to wish that you are spectacular and you influence the field of privacy. But if you were going to go back um, to give your 25-year-old self some advice um, from where you are today, and those early steps in cyber insurance that you took that got you here, what would you say?
That is a tough question because I truly believe there's something to learn and gain from every circumstance. So I can't say that I regret anything that I've done in my career, but I suppose if there was one piece of advice that I would give that person myself earlier on, that would be roughly around the time that the syndicates were approaching me about doing a standalone cyber product. And I probably should have pursued that a little stronger. As a younger attorney, I didn't think that I had the knowledge or the capital to be able to pursue that. So maybe I would advise my younger self to maybe press forward with that because it's definitely not a fad, and it will end up enriching your life tremendously.
True, and once you're through it, it always looks easier. And um, one of the things that we've often heard, swallow a frog for breakfast, take on the most difficult thing for the day first. And in hindsight, things look easier once you've gotten through them. So the conversation holds good for careers as well. Good advice. I think I know the answer to this one. I'm going to ask anyway. What's your superpower?
I think being a creative problem solver and maybe have some compassion for my clients too. I put myself in their shoes. So I think that it lends me the ability to come up with maybe some nuanced solutions that maybe others might not come up with. I'm not afraid of doing something that might be a little more difficult if it gets a better result for my client, depending on what their circumstances are, what kind of business they are, what type of customers they have. I think that's really served me well, that I can read the room and then respond accordingly.
And there it is. I was going to say read the room and connect, at the level that your client or your audience needs you to. And I've been personal privy to that. Uh, in the next couple of questions, we're going to build this very delicious sundae. We're going to set the base with cyber insurance, and the cherry is going to be the much awaited conversation about privacy. That I waited for at least 5 months. So let's start with the base. Cyber insurance, as you said, right? This was, like Google stocks about 30 years ago. No one knew where it was going. It was a fad. It's like, hey, whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll stick, maybe it won't. Today, in a short period, you've seen the early startings of cyber insurance at least 15 years back, 15 to 18 years. I'm going to take just the last 10 years. And it's been disruptive to say the least. It went from, oh, yeah, here's one more thing that the insurance industry wants us to do, to today becoming very critical and integral to businesses, making sure that we dot our I's, we cross our T's, we solemnly swear that whatever we declare to the insurance companies is what we did, or they're going to check. We've had colleagues of ours in our peer group who've had massive claims rejected because they were able to find deviations in what they declared as their core business. And
Mhm.
now there's a whole ancillary business that's sprung up to ensure that you are insurance compliant, right? So we're
Mhm.
adding layers of complexity. And given the fact that ransomware is the top threat even today and will continue to be for businesses, comment on cyber insurance from your point of view. Is it's a necessity? How do we comply? What do you see with your clients on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I that's a great question. I work with a lot of different insurance carriers that provide a cyber product and assist a lot of their insureds when they have cyber crises. Cyber, I think, is so integral as a business, like part of a business function at a base level with contracts. They're getting more and more sophisticated where your business partners or your customers are going to be requiring you to have that kind of coverage. And then just simply transferring the risk. When you're talking about, you noted ransom, those payments are getting higher and they're not going away anytime soon. So if you can transfer that risk. One of the things, I almost think that those two things, although incredibly important, are almost secondary to the support mechanisms that insurance can use. I can appreciate that some of your audience that may have had difficulty with getting a claim paid for whatever reason may be a bit more cynical, but in broadest terms, for most insureds, they bring a panoply of services that can assist an insured before, during, and after an event. So during an event, being able to identify vendors that have been tested and tried, they're true, repeatedly through different types of incidences. And if there's an issue, that carrier will leverage their relationship with those vendors to get it right, or frankly, look at other vendors that are going to serve their insureds in a better way. They also can provide services or in a way, I don't want to say consultation, but guide insureds on perhaps best practices, or think about what improvements they should be looking at in order to be more attractive risk, for instance. And some carriers are getting more and more sophisticated with the kind of tools that they offer insured on even a practical level with their cybersecurity and data management practices. And as far as with the compliance piece that you asked about, there are a few notable items there. First and foremost, I think that a company needs to be very conscientious about picking a broker that has true cybersecurity experience. It's a very sexy thing to put on websites. You'll see brokers doing it, lawyers doing it, any kind of consultant adding that in their drop-down menu. Do they really have experience in that area? If they don't, and they can't assist you adequately during that application process, and this is leaning towards perhaps a denial of a claim. If you're not answering those questions correctly, then you might have a material representation issue later on where they may deny coverage for that reason. And if you have a savvy, sophisticated broker, and there are many out there, they should be able to walk you through that. They see these applications time and time again. And if there's any ambiguity, and there always is, because these applications they started with only a few questions and now there's up to 300 in some instances.
True.
They can go back and ask for clarity. What are you really looking for? And if you have to perhaps amend something so you don't get caught out later, if there's some kind of misinterpretation of a question, that can hopefully get resolved.
Layers of requirements and compliance to when the claim actually comes in, but what you said hits home. Hire a subject matter expert, sift through all the frogs that we've got to kiss till we get to one that we really want, right? And this podcast will pay for itself if our listeners know, how do we narrow down? Normally it's word of mouth. It's a peer who's used a broker successfully. Now, of course, the true test is when there's a claim, and boy, don't we don't want that, or we don't want to get to a point to know whether this policy held good because it passed and we got a claim fulfilled. Any further advice on getting past websites and all the flyers and the mailers to pick good cyber insurance brokers who've got expertise? If I may add, this, my business, I know well, whatever it is. But to the rest of the world, it's much like that parable of the blind man and the elephant, right? It depends on which part of the elephant you hold, and they'll be like, oh, yeah, that's my business. I'm in software or I'm in computer consulting. No, you're not. You're actually in programming. And God only knows we've got enough of 3 and now 4-letter acronyms in terms of this defining technology businesses like ours. So any advice on narrowing down to pick the right person to engage with to get good cyber insurance?
Much. So
Okay.
to start with, I would, if you have relationships already with people that are in the cybersecurity data privacy sphere, like an IT consultant, your MSP, if you have a data breach coach, a legal counsel like myself, if you already have insurance with the carrier, perhaps a carrier representative, you could have a candid conversation with them if they have brokers that they like working with. On another level, if you have to start from scratch and you don't have those avenues, which I think you should do anyway, to vet any recommendations you get, it starts probably with your Google search, but then asking those individuals really specific questions. So the representative of that broker asked to speak to the person that is actually leading their cyber team, and then ask them really pointed questions about who's on your team, who would be managing my account, what is their experience, and then certainly go vet them out and see how much experience they actually have. And then ask about their book of business. How large are these companies that you're working with? What types of companies, and eh, to get a better feel if they're familiar with your industry, and how many years have they been in it? What are the limits that you're typically obtaining for your clients? You may be in the $10 million range, and they're typically doing something much lower, like maybe 100 or 1 million or lower. And that might have ramifications for you if they're not used to working with a larger company. So just asking some very pointed questions. I'd want to make sure that the people that you're working with, that are going to be communicating directly with the carriers and looking at these apps and interpreting them for you to help you answer them, they have the experience in this area. Some brokers, they even have people on staff that have a bit of a technical background as well. That can obviously be hugely beneficial for their clients. So those are some of the highlights that I would be looking at.
I love it. I love it. So this is, staring you in the face. It's a great idea. Build a team with, probably the company CTO, the insurance broker representative, an attorney who specializes in this. Could start with your general counsel and your MSSP or your MSP. Put
Mhm.
them in a room together. And I like, a top 10 or top 15 or top 20 questions that you ask during this meeting to ensure that we get this right. Excellent. So I think there's an article either for you or for us in the making here about how to get cyber insurance right. We're going to reach out to you about this one. Great. Let's talk about the matter at hand, um, privacy. So the genesis of us on this podcast was this one slide that you had amongst the very informative presentation about 50 states having possibly 50 different ways of defining PII, if I remember right, collecting this data, keeping it. And I have to say, on a recent trip to Europe, it's amazing how Stepford-like websites are in Europe. Everyone asks a question right up front, right? Do you want these cookies? Do you reject? And it's amazing. It's very standardized. It's a beautiful thing that you can actually hit reject consistently, and the button appears in the same place. And there's
Yeah.
no, light beige, so it blends with the background. It's right there and it's in your face. So we know that GDPR does this, and GDPR does this well. And GDPR simply says, look, you can go to the collector of your data and say, I want to be able to either edit my data or delete it. That would be one of the true tests of privacy that we're slowly adopting. Um, these two giants, populous countries, India and China, have either come out or coming out with privacy policies uh, in cultures that generally thought, you could go and walk in. I know in India growing up, I could go buy a CD of, and I can't believe I'm saying this on the record here. I'm going to anyway. I'll probably send you $1 as a retainer. But literally, the street corner would have, you could buy for $10 Office Suite on a CD. That's how casual things were, and it's amazing. And it's really good to see that we're now streamlining, even in India and in other countries, and making sure that we're following the protocols necessary for privacy. Privacy is becoming an important issue for doing business in these countries. So that's good. And here in the US, especially in California, and California tends to lead, whether it was Senate Bill 1386 and making sure that your data is safe. And today with CCPA and the latest CPRA, states are either adopting or following similarly. So privacy is becoming a big deal. Please comment. This is the core of your business. Uh, comment on the lay of the land for privacy in the US, please.
Sure, sure. And just to touch on India, it's interesting that they have one of the shortest reporting deadlines, like 24 hours, and that just happened recently. So there is a lot of movement happening in India. But you're absolutely right. With the United States, it's referred to often as a patchwork. We'll have federal mandates for such things as healthcare under HIPAA, for example. But for the state breach notification laws, it's all 50 states and the territories have their separate independent laws. There's a lot of overlap amongst most of them, primarily with whether sensitive information has been accessed, meaning a threat actor is just looking at it, versus acquisition, where the threat actor is taking it, to talk about it in most basic terms. And then when you talk about the categories of PII, or personally identifiable information, that's the triggers for notifying. There is some substantial overlap, primarily with social security numbers, as you might expect, driver's licenses, and financial information when it's coupled with a PIN number, an access code, or a password. From there, you have a whole panoply of categories that you can select from that range from biometrics to healthcare to uh, different kinds of IDs, sometimes member IDs, and geolocation is also becoming more popular, if you want to call it that. Florida, for instance, just added it to their list. And then in addition to that, with the timing of the notifications, that really ranges quite widely. It can be as loose and vague as soon as practicable or reasonable, and then others have 45 days or something in between. So you have to be pretty mindful of being in compliance with any of those state laws that have been touched on or triggered. It's not where you're located as a company. It's not where you collected that information. So if you're an Illinois company and all of your employees are in Illinois and you collected the information in Illinois, it's probably a pretty good guess that the majority of those people, if they're affected in a widespread data breach, are going to be under the Illinois breach law. But if they retired and moved to Florida or Texas or California, it's where those residents are currently. So you need to follow, after you aggregate the information and find out where they actually live today, then with your attorney's help, you assess what laws you have to follow and then how you have to follow them. Because some of the laws too, I didn't touch on it earlier, but they delineate a whole number of things, such as even down to the font, the headings, and what you include in the letters. And that can be very different from state to state.
Including if the data we have as businesses for these clients, customers, visitors, users, they've now moved offshore to a different country, or do we track them just in the United States?
We do have to sometimes do an analysis if they're overseas. The way the different countries' laws are written, sometimes there'll be somewhat of a safe harbor, if you will, or an exemption because your business perhaps isn't targeting EU persons, for instance. So you have to do that analysis on a case-by-case basis as well, but it certainly comes up.
So what's the answer, Blair? So this is we know the problem. We know we've got to eat our vegetables. Now, how do we do this? Like, where, again, do we go about making sure as laws continue to now have more teeth and now starting to be implemented, what's a good practice to ensure businesses are compliant?
It's multi-level, really. So when you first talk about responding to an incident, being prepared for that, having an incident response plan that sets out the incident response team. So all of those critical individuals setting out their roles and their contact information, and then moving through things like your data inventory. Where's your most critical data held? Also critical functions. What systems would you want to have prioritized if you had to restore and stand up the environment again? Having communications for different stakeholders internally, like employees or your customers or business partners. Maybe not using that specifically, but at least having a template so the team has a starting point for agreement. And in all of those areas, your legal counsel will guide you and essentially quarterback that. I will say that 9 out of 10 or more, 9.5 out of 10 of my clients either don't have an incident response plan, it's not accessible because they don't have a hard copy and it's on the server that was compromised, or it's so out of date that it's practically useless. So companies often rely quite heavily on their legal counsel. We can also assist those companies in putting those in place and then doing what we call a tabletop, where you come up with a scenario, a crisis scenario, a nightmare scenario that is really realistic for that company. So that way, the incident response team can go through the motion of practicing that scenario, how you're going to respond to it. And it's a great way to identify gaps. One that comes up quite often in the real world is how are we going to pay for things like the vendor that's helping us respond to this, or maybe you have to do a ransom payment. Who's going to be approving that? Those people oftentimes are either they were terminated or retired and they haven't gotten somebody new that actually has that official capacity, or they're on vacation in a place that they can't be located, so or contacted. So being able to identify those kind of gaps is really, really critical. I think also part of that with the incident response plan planning is also making sure your policies and procedures are fulsome and cover your company in a clean, clear, modern way. So it's easy for your employees to follow. For instance, with data retention, I talked earlier about how the laws of the state where that individual lives is the law that is triggered. There is no expiration on PII. So even if they're deceased, you may have to send a letter to their estate. So if your company is keeping data from the 70s for no reason, like no practical business reason, you need to really think about what your exposure is there. At one point, you'd make the argument that it's really expensive to save that much data as well, but that's obviously data storage is getting cheaper and cheaper. So it's like having a huge duffel bag, you just keep stuffing it and you just, yeah, I'm going to deal with that later. I'm going to clean out that
Sure.
closet later.
Sure.
It turns out to be one of the most expensive and reputationally harmful aspects of dealing with an incident when you have to data mine a humongous universe of data that is way out of date for business purposes, but now you have to use it to do your notifications. And the larger that group is, the more expensive it is, the longer it takes to do that. You may generate claims. Plaintiffs' counsel across the country are trolling AG website, Attorney General websites that also need to often be notified when notifications go to their residents, their citizens, and they'll try to gin up class actions. So if you have a larger group, like let's say 50,000 or more, you can expect that somebody is going to try to file a claim. So just from a mitigation standpoint.
Interesting. And from your local friendly neighborhood IT consultant, MSP or MSSP, there are apps for that. There are tools that will go scan the network, collect the data, avoid
Mhm.
duplication or dedupe your data, ensure that rights are maintained and the right person's looking at the right data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are tools for that. It is awareness and communication that's critical. And you brought up an interesting concept. So we in the business, in the cybersecurity business, or a company that I'm part of, we definitely offer red teams and blue teams. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term, but the blue teams are the ones internal that'll go and, test drives how our cybersecurity culture is. They're friendly, they're internal. And the red teams on the outside, we blindfold them, drop them off in the middle of the desert and say, hey, go try to attack this company, right? And it's interesting that we could actually apply this to privacy incident response, and see how we hold up policies and procedures in the
Mhm.
area of privacy by blue teaming and red teaming this to see whether we're compliant and whether we need to make adjustments rather than waiting for something
Mhm.
to happen, right? For the hammer to fall.
Yeah,
So
that's an interesting way to characterize that approach, and I think that is kind of gamification as well, to get the buy-in from staff members, because the last thing they wanna do otherwise is to go through old data and things like that.
absolutely.
But yeah, but finding those buckets and also letting them, if you have different departments, many different departments, talking with them about what data is most critical to you. Obviously, talking with HR, talking to finance, but there may be other ones like the production floor. They might have certain data or servers or something that would be absolutely critical to the company. So being able to speak with them to identify where those gaps are. And then if, like you mentioned, if you have relationships with outside vendors that can help you with whatever tools they can offer, with the permissions, with having maybe automated deletion or something like that, and also auditing and recording of those processes, that could be extremely helpful to a company and take that burden off of them.
Let it be known, Blair, we thought of it here first. So, and it tends to get crazy on privacy. So we have a client that we are ensuring they're CPRA compliant, and they had a request from one of the employees saying, can you not have my social security and employment dates on my 401k? And we're like, look, this is integral to running the 401k, and there's no way that we can. So, no way we can't, or we can obfuscate this data. So sometimes the requests are far left field, and you definitely need a team with you to be able to sort this out and implement policies and procedures. So now to the fun part, Blair. AI. You knew it was coming, right? We can't go without mentioning those two vowels. Um, One of the big deals with AI, and its success is the fact that it needs vast amounts of data. Just it's a predictive model. It's generative, no doubt, and it's based on the amount of data that's been fed and continuing to feed into these generative models. Um, Not kind of, but 180 degrees opposite to privacy laws, where privacy says, look, little or less is good. Make sure data is controlled and uh, held confidentially. That there is protections to your data, privacy, PII, all the stuff that we talked about. And here is, um, you know, these magnitudes of order change that's coming in with AI, making our jobs easier, but based on the fact that it's a data monster and needs data. Is there a potential clash that could possibly happen in these exciting times that we live with? Is there a potential, privacy laws meet, the AI tsunami? How do you see this?
Oh, that's definitely going to happen. And I think the most practical example to point to is, again, with the EU and GDPR being at the forefront of looking at privacy as a right as opposed to kind of retroactively like we do here. And that is changing, but we're certainly coming from a different approach. So we're lagging behind. The GDPR has already been addressing AI. Italy, in fact, perhaps it was in July, I believe, they had halted some AI usage because of what they perceived as perhaps unintended consequences. So Europe is certainly at the forefront of thinking about what could these unintended consequences be and addressing those. And we'll probably take a lot of our leads from them and how it's applied and how it actually works on the ground. I bet money it's probably gonna be California. I didn't really think of.
Either California or New York. You're right.
Yeah,
In fact,
exactly,
the New
yeah.
York Times case is one that we could easily cite, where the New York Times being sued for information that it gathered through
Mm,
AI. So, yep, you're
yeah,
right.
yeah, and it might be and interestingly here, the focus, rather than being so much on data privacy, initially was on copyright and intellectual property concerns. So more from a financial business perspective as opposed to individual data privacy rights. Um, with AI, I think most people are familiar with some of the issues that came out exactly a year ago this month with Samsung employees trying to find out how to fix some coding issues and were uploading proprietary code, which caused all kinds of problems because then that was out in the wild. There was also another really salacious example where a professor was listed on this list of academics generated by an AR article accusing him of sexual assault and even cited to several prominent newspapers like the Wall Street Journal and I believe the Washington Post as as corroborating evidence of this having occurred, and it was all false. It was all made out, as they say, hallucinations. So some of those things, they're being dealt with, but they're definitely on an ad hoc, retroactive basis. Things are just moving so quickly with AI. And I think I keep saying unintended consequences, but I really think that the power of this technology and how quickly it's being adopted and perhaps not always very thoughtfully, can lead to some really serious consequences. So hopefully people are pausing when they're hearing these things on the news and thinking about how this is going to impact them personally or how it might impact others. Um, I know companies are thinking more and more about having policies in place for their employees to ensure that they're not uploading or publicly sharing their proprietary information, the trade secrets, but also the information of their clients. That needs to be right up there in bold and capital letters in a conversation with clients. If you're a data mining company, for instance, or data processor, you need to be upfront with your client about whether you anticipate using their data to train your IA
AI.
model, or model. I'm sorry, AI
It
models.
was going to happen. Yes.
Maybe or copy. Yeah, because that has come up. And obviously businesses, clients, they usually really recoil at that prospect.
True. You said hallucinations, and I see hallucinations, and I raise you AI bias. So l- we can talk about navigating through the white waters of AI and intellectual property issues, etc. Because God only knows we've got generally precedent, and I say this in the general terms. But let's talk about AI bias. Uh, it's possible that I could hire 100,000 data entry operators to plug into AI that the Earth is flat and influence results because we're data based here. And you mentioned hallucinations as well. And again, moving forward in this hypothetical situation, it's possible that someone gleans this data out of GPT and publishes it. For me, this is this is a tough one. How do we mitigate against bias and hallucinations?
Well, I know there are a lot of initiatives, especially led by minority scientists that are looking into how to mitigate those issues. I've heard quite a few really, really interesting and thoughtful interviews with those people on how that can be overcome. I think right now, with the biases that are already inherently there, that's going to be very difficult to achieve. Um, I think the sampling and testing and verifying. One point that I'd like to make is when I'm using the word hallucination, or sometimes you hear about using it as a tool and building a relationship with AI. I think the cuteness of personifying this machine, it is just a tool, and people need to be very aware and check themselves to not just take whatever is spit out, but you have to verify it. I use the analogy of Wikipedia. Like as a professor, I don't have a problem with my students looking to there as a starting point. It's a tool, but you have to verify that information. You can't just blindly quote that because it's coming from kind of like a old school AI. Have thousands, hundreds of thousands of people putting in what they believe their knowledge is about whatever topic it is. But you're going to have to go out and verify that out as well. And just, I think, using some of the nomenclature around AI to make it seem perhaps not as scary or cute or whatever that is, to make it more approachable, I think can also, in some ways, be a little bit of its downfall in that people get a little sloppy because they view it as a relationship, like a close, intimate relationship with another human being or an assistant, and that is not the case.
Well, absolutely well said. The the analogy of, hey, look, this is as much Wikipedia on steroids as anything else, and no, it's not a person behind the screen, right? There's no Wizard of Oz. Thank you for that. So let's move on to something fun. We talked about technology, great insights on privacy. Thank you. And if there's any, one more takeaway. When you finish listening to this, please make sure that you have some sort of AI policy at the least within your organizations. That's a non-negotiable. So, uh, back to you, the person. What's anything in terms of what are you excited about? Passion projects.
Passion project. Well, I did allude to the fact that I am teaching. I just started teaching at my law school in data privacy, and it's their first practical course in incident response. And I really, really enjoy getting the next generation this foundational knowledge so that they can move into this space. I do the same with mentoring in women in cybersecurity. I think it's just so important to give, especially minority women and our Black and Brown colleagues, opportunities to break in, whether it's through scholarships or just mentorship and coaching. Um, and it's some of the conversations that you can have with these young minds are just phenomenal. And it also includes some people that might be a bit long in the tooth and they've been in the IT business, but they want to shift into cybersecurity. So it's really interesting to see these individuals, these professionals grow and mold their careers into something that they want to do. Not all that different from the path that I took, where I took my skill sets that would work for this, kind of being the firefighter type thing where you're going in and dealing with chaos, using those tools to help people in a burgeoning space that is just going to continue to grow.
Awesome. Your passion shows. It's been recognized. Um, let's move on to another fun one. Best investment you ever made. For me, the hardest one was August 1990. I come in from India. The rupee doesn't convert to much in dollars, and I've got to invest in a $3 laundry basket. I can't move forward. So this is a fun question. Best investment you've ever made, Blair.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna have a practical one and
Huh?
a fun one.
Sure.
So my practical one, it will probably bore you, but it would honestly be the education that is focused on the cybersecurity. Once I decided that's what I wanted to do between the
Absolutely.
master's and the separate, all the different certifications, it's just come back in spades. I'm just kind of repetitive and repeating myself on how much I enjoy what I do, but it's just so exciting to be able to help people in this area where things are constantly changing.
Yes, I
And then
couldn't agree more. Travel and education opens doors.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It makes you think about things that you may have not considered before because your pattern and practice works, but there might be something better out there and you don't know unless you get a more fulsome experience and you can gain that through education and then working with different organizations as well that are in this area. Um, the fun one would be a boat. I bought
Yes.
a boat last year.
Wow, good for you.
But so good for my soul
Yeah,
because it's a very hectic area of law to be in, and it's nice to have your cup of coffee in the morning out on your boat.
cool. That is fun. Very meditative and nice. So let's throw in one more. Something surprising about you, right? Habits. You meditate, you do cold plunges, you sleep under the starry skies. Any fun habit?
I love to camp. I
Oh, yeah.
think a lot of people would not expect that from me, but that's really one of my favorite, most enjoyable vacations is doing some in the tent, bring your toilet paper and your toothbrush
That's
camping.
great. And a shovel. Okay, we won't go there. So Blair, rapid fire. You can one or two words and you're allowed to pass, but rapid thoughts on religion.
Ooh, okay. Well, I might get myself in trouble here, but I've been an atheist for a very, very long time.
Okay.
Kindness is key.
We go all over the spectrum on this podcast. Politics.
The person that can do the job, and that seems really tough right now.
It absolutely. Books. Anything
But
that you can recommend, anything that sticks out. And
oh,
boy, do I know you read a lot.
you're gonna think I'm such a one-trick pony, but there is looking for the book right now. It's a cybersecurity book that was written about the cybersecurity wars and focuses on some of our key adversaries, including China. I'm only maybe a third of the way through, but I hate putting it down. It's really good.
That good, huh? So this is what you take on the boat.
Yes. It will be. Yes.
So this is mine. You know, it says yes, and it's a book about improv and how to stimulate conversations. Just
Oh,
picked this up this week and pretty good book. No
excellent.
boat yet. Music,
I,
Blair.
I take a note of that.
What about music?
Music. I do Lauryn Hill quite a bit. I love Toots and the Maytals, things like that. Kind of old school.
Nice. Historical figures.
Historical figures. Jane Addams is a good one. Yeah, Ida B. Wells.
Yep.
Like some of my powerful women that got us the vote and helped people get their place in the world here in the United States.
Through suffrage and everything else. Awesome. Last but not least, lessons from grandmas.
Work, 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 work. You don't get any
Really?
work for it.
Okay. So let's end with, this is you. We've got a great, we've got, thank you for allowing us an insight, into life outside of everything legal. Any mantra, core values that you live by?
I think I mentioned it earlier with everything happens for a reason. I think I talked about it with experiences that I don't have any regrets because you get something out of every experience. And it sounds trite and perhaps cliche, and it can be on a plaque on the wall, but it's something that I really, really live by. And it certainly gets you through some very difficult and stressful times as well. There's a reason that this is happening, and you just have to find what that is. And you always will. And then it helps you into the next chapter.
You passed the test. We came to the same answer both ways. Your 25-year-old self will be proud of you, Blair. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Secure IT as I continue the cybersecurity discussion with customers, vendors, end users, and employees, helping us to learn from their insights, knowledge, and experiences. And this has been a very interesting conversation. Please make sure you follow this podcast wherever podcasts are hosted, including Google, Spotify, and Anchor. Please do direct message me on LinkedIn, Twitter, feedback with questions, comments, criticisms, and kudos. Thanks again, everyone, and see you next month.